speaking to this here. Okay. The canal? I'm afraid I missed its heyday. I was 24 when they approved the program, 27 when it reached Brookville, and 34 by the time it was finished. I only ever got to go on it twice. The first time was in the summer of 1846. It was June. The Franklin Guards had just gotten mustered for the war with Mexico. We were 10 days of travel towards New Albany when we got word that Governor Whitcomb declined our service, and I know on good information that we had organized well before other companies. But what can you expect from that rogue from Vermont? The recently constructed canal sped our mobilizing tenfold. My pa told me that mustering used to take months, with men marching from all corners of the county for weeks to make it to muster day. The whole of Indiana's 30 companies were assembled in New Albany by June 24th, barely more than 2 weeks from the Franklin Guards' unneeded organization. Not wanting to waste the trip, the supplies, or our years with the county militia, several of us from the now disbanded Franklin Guards would fall in with the Bartholomew Volunteers and serve our 12 months with them. Indiana's regiments began departing for Mexico, with the 1st Regiment leaving on July 5th, the 2nd and 3rd following up behind them, our target being that great city of New Orleans. We and the 3rd Regiment would reach New Orleans on the 15th, just as the 1st was leaving. I was saddened to only briefly visit New Orleans. It was a truly mammoth city, dwarfing anything I'd ever seen up till then. Our state capital of Indianapolis was minuscule in comparison, even a decade after I visited New Orleans. I was able to sneak a visit to the site of Jackson's victory, but had to cut the trip short. It was a war to fight, after all. The trip from New Orleans started on the 18th and made up for the relative calm of the trip downriver. Our ships were scattered and delayed by terrible weather, and some poor souls from the 2nd Regiment stuck at sea for 11 days. Our company of the 3rd got to the island of Brazos Santiago around July 25th. Brazos Santiago was host to Camp Belknap, which wasn't more than a couple thousand tents on a sandbar. I've never seen so diverse a collection of men from all over the country. They had come from as far away as Maine. There were even some recent arrivals to the country who joined the army for a starting bit of pay. Camp life was marked by hours of drill and manual labor, hauling fresh water from the Rio Grande to camp, clearing the shrubs, and trying to avoid the heat. We were in camp there for months, and disease ran amok, losing us a volunteer or two by the day, not to mention the weekly occurrence of some poor soul used to whatever gentle currents of his home, drowning in the Rio. In early August, the 1st Regiment was dispatched to Camp Merida, tasked with watching over the prisoners the regulars had captured. Us and the 3rd were spared from that menial fate, instead following behind them and then passing them up to Matamoros in October. I remember camp there was much more pleasant ordeal than the conditions at Belknap. Dry ground, close fresh water, and a nicer view. The physical health of our regiment was greatly improved with the change of scenery. The surgeon said of the 100 volunteers recovering during the move, only 33 were still sick. There was also an incident involving Sergeant Philip Love, who was stabbed to death in a robbery over money he didn't even have on him. November passed without much excitement, except for on the 19th when an awful storm blew through camp. Then at the end of the month, General Lane was ordered to take us Hoosiers down to Monterey, the poor 1st Regiment still being ordered to stay, in spite of the protestations of the General and Colonel Drake. Us and the 3rd were well on our way to Saltillo, while the poor 1st were still having to turn around. Saltillo appeared to be a city of some importance, easily 10 times the size of Brookville, but with just as much charm. Some of my comrades didn't appreciate Mexican architecture, but personally I quite enjoyed it, especially that church. I had never seen one so grand, much bigger than the seminary they had back in Brookville. That was another thing. There seemed to be quite the anti-Catholic bend to a lot of the soldiery, but I just didn't get it. So what if they have the Bible read to them instead of reading it themselves? Anyways, we had moved down to Saltillo in the wake of General Taylor's victory over Ampudia at Monterey. The rest of December and January passed by without much notice, at least from what I remember. Much of my memory is occupied by the excitement of February, our first action. Us and the 3rd and 2nd Regiments had been steadily advancing with General Taylor, and we found ourselves at a hacienda about a dozen miles out from Saltillo. The Mexicans picked a bad day to attack. February 22nd, George Washington's birthday. We were all in good spirits despite being outnumbered 3-1. The third was placed alongside the 1st Illinois and 2nd Kentucky on a secondary front line, separated from the main force by several ridges. Before us was a real army. Those dazzling blue uniforms with their regalia and piping gave quite the contrast to our myriad grays and light blues. Despite our high spirits, there was some worry that us volunteers wouldn't hold against General Blanco's men, but we showed them. The second had a much rougher time, though. Being the center of the front line, they faced repeated Mexican assaults. When the support and artillery was repositioned, Colonel Bowles from Orange County ordered a retreat. That started a panic, caused the line to break. They tried several times to regroup and hold positions, but they couldn't. Them and the other regiments nearby made a fight retreat back to Buena Vista. The 1st Illinois and the 2nd Kentucky headed to reinforce the faltering front line, while we held the flank in case the Mexicans tried to go around. During the night, we repositioned to get closer to the main force, and there was a few cavalry skirmishes in the night. The next day, the 3rd and the Mississippi Rifles, who were under the command of that senator, Jefferson Davis, went on the offensive. We were tasked with pushing the Mexicans back through the valleys they had come up, so I rallied some boys from the 3rd and led a small charge. Fighting was sporadic throughout the rest of the day, but in the end, we came out on top. For my gallantry, I was awarded a commission as a sergeant. However, I never got much chance to use that. Sickness laid me low shortly after, and I was eventually medically discharged. My second trip on the canal was in May of '47. After surviving battle and a month to recover from illness, I was finally heading home. By May, I had made it back to Lawrenceburg and figured I'd take the canal back to Brookville. The fare wasn't too bad from what I remember, and the discount they gave me for serving in the Army helped too. This trip was much nicer. No longer was I a militiaman anxious for battle. I was a returning soldier. The boat was much less packed this time, and the summer heat was replaced by cool breezes and on and off showers. A rotten New Year's Day flood had dammed several parts of the canal, and the recent repairs were still visible. Whilst not in any particular hurry, I did yearn for home and to see my family again, but the common ride helped put my mind at ease. Made a brief stop in West Harrison. There was a bizarre building that looked like it had been square once, but pulled at its corners. It was also built right along the canal and seemed to follow its shape. After that, the rest of the trip home was as smooth as butter. To be honest, I miss the canal. It had a charm to it that you just can't see elsewhere since. Sure, the train goes mostly along the same route, but those hours gently bobbing from town to town will always stick with me. Maybe it's just my age, but the half hour of rattling just isn't the same. My only hope is someday someone will think of something to do with it. Maybe one day it'll reopen, but I don't think that'll be anytime soon.